I remember the moment like it was yesterday. The courtroom was silent, too silent. My son's words had barely left his mouth when I felt the weight of every eye in the room. "He's confused," he said. Just like that, calm, certain. And all I could do was look back at the judge. My lips didn't move. My voice didn't rise. Nothing. The judge studied me for a long, deliberate moment. I let the pause stretch. A few seconds felt like minutes. People around me shifted, some whispering. I didn't flinch. My silence spoke louder than any denial could. No one knew then what I knew. My mind wasn't clouded. My heart wasn't lost. But saying a word would have been too easy, too obvious. Silence was my shield. The story didn't start here. It started years ago, in small moments no one noticed. A missed birthday, a quiet lie, a hidden bank statement. Little cracks that grew into something bigger. I always sensed it, the slow erosion of trust. My son. He had chosen a path, one I had hoped to guide him away from, but he went anyway. And now, here we were. Me sitting, calm. Him standing, pointing, accusing. The room waited for me to falter. I didn't. When the lawyer asked me to speak, I just nodded slightly. A gesture. Enough to remind them I understood the rules, the game, that I was present. They expected outrage. I gave them calm. I could see the tension in the bailiff's jaw, the shift in the courtroom reporter's posture. Even the judge leaned slightly forward, curiosity flickering across his features. He wondered if I was unaware or simply choosing not to fight. But the truth was more complex. I had seen the signs. Hidden messages, subtle manipulations, late-night calls. I had followed every detail quietly, cataloging it all. And now, the silence became a kind of power. Every accusation he threw at me bounced off that quiet. Every insinuation was met with stillness. The hearing continued. Witnesses spoke. Documents were read aloud. My son's voice carried authority. But the calm in the room began to shift. The judge paused more frequently, weighing the words against the atmosphere I had created simply by not reacting. I caught my reflection in the glass behind the clerk's desk. Older, weathered, not broken, not as confused as they claimed. A quiet observer, holding on to more than anyone imagined. Later, when they tried to provoke me, I only let a small smile touch the corners of my lips, just enough to unsettle them. Not mockery, not triumph, just awareness. I knew things they didn't. And that knowledge was mine alone. It wasn't revenge, it wasn't victory. It was simply truth, held quietly, like a breath before it is released. And I knew the moment would come when my silence would speak for me. The judge called a short recess. People shuffled out of the room, murmuring. My son didn't leave. He stayed, watching me, waiting for a crack. I didn't give him one. Not yet. There was a pause in the hallway, just the echo of footsteps. And I realized, in that quiet, that I was stronger than the accusations, stronger than the betrayal, stronger than the doubt he tried to plant in the minds of others. But the hardest part wasn't holding the silence. It was knowing how much he didn't understand me, how little he had truly seen. And perhaps that was the point. When the recess ended, we returned. The papers rustled, the gavel tapped, and the story continued. Piece by piece, truth by quiet truth. And though no one in that room knew it yet, the balance had begun to shift. I caught the judge's eye again. This time, he didn't look for confusion. He looked for clarity. And in the stillness, I let him find it. Because silence can be louder than words. We returned to our seats. The air felt heavier now. The judge's eyes lingered longer on me. I felt no fear. Only observation. Only awareness. My son tried again. He presented evidence, texts, emails, photographs, each one carefully chosen to make me look less capable, less stable, less worthy. But I didn't speak. I didn't react. My hands rested lightly on the table, my breathing steady. My silence became a mirror. Every accusation bounced back. Every doubt reflected not on me, but on the one who spoke it. There were small shifts in the courtroom I noticed immediately. The clerk straightened her posture. The opposing lawyer's jaw tightened. Even the judge paused longer before responding. My silence had weight. My stillness carried meaning. I remembered when I first saw the cracks in my son's loyalty, the quiet thefts, the whispered lies. I confronted nothing. I let him choose his path, thinking perhaps he would learn, perhaps he would grow. Now I understood. Silence isn't weakness. It's patience, observation, strategy. A quiet kind of power that no anger can match. My son's voice rose slightly, not loud, but sharper than before. He doesn't understand reality, he said. He can't manage his own affairs. I leaned back in my chair. I let the words settle in the room. I let them hang there like smoke. The judge's pen hovered over his notes. He waited. I waited. And then, a tiny thing happened. A document slipped from the opposing counsel's folder. He bent to pick it up. A momentary lapse. Just a flicker. But in that flicker, I saw the opening. I didn't move. I only watched. I had kept meticulous records of every interaction, every detail they thought I had forgotten. Late-night phone calls, receipts, conversations, small hidden truths. And now, those truths began to surface quietly. Not as confrontation, not as accusation, just evidence. Calm, undeniable evidence that my mind was sharper than anyone suspected. The judge looked at the papers, paused, read slowly. He looked up. And for the first time, I felt him truly seeing me. Not as confused, not as frail, not as accused, but as the one who understood everything. My son shifted in his seat. He realized, perhaps too late, that his certainty was misplaced. That my silence had been my strategy all along. That my restraint was a form of power he had underestimated. There was a moment, a breath, where the courtroom held its collective pulse. No one moved. No one spoke. And in that silence, the truth began to speak. I could feel my own heart slow, my hands relax. Not in triumph, not in revenge, but in quiet recognition. Recognition that even betrayal, even accusation could be met with dignity, with patience, with presence. And yet, the story was not finished. The hearings would continue. The words, the motions, the whispers of doubt, they would persist. But the balance had shifted. Not by anger, not by protest, but by the simple act of listening, observing, and withholding. When the next witness approached, I merely nodded. A small acknowledgement, a reminder that I was still here, still aware, still in control of my own truth. In the hallway later, someone whispered to me, an ally or perhaps an observer. I've never seen anyone do that. I only smiled slightly. That was all I allowed. My silence said more than words ever could. And in the quiet of the empty courtroom after everyone had left for the day, I walked slowly past the benches, past the judges' chambers, past the echoes of voices that had tried to define me. I felt the weight of years, of choices, of patience. I felt the power of simply being, because silence is not absence. It is presence. It is understanding. It is the careful, measured force that no shouting can ever match. And I knew, when the next day came, the next argument, the next motion, that my silence would speak louder than any voice. The courtroom was quieter than ever. Fewer people now. The air thick with expectation, but calm expectation. My son tried once more. A final plea, a last attempt to define me as confused or incapable. His words were measured, precise, rehearsed. But the energy had shifted. I could see it in the judge's eyes. The careful calculation. The subtle recognition that my silence was not empty, that it carried weight, history, understanding. I leaned slightly forward, not to argue, not to defend, just to be present, to let the room feel my attention, my awareness, my years of observation. Documents were laid before the judge, testimonies recounted. Every detail my son had hoped would crush me now reflected differently under the light of patience and quiet comprehension. Each proof was reframed by what I had silently witnessed, recorded, and understood. I didn't speak, not a word, and yet, every subtle nod, every calm breath, every measured glance across the courtroom told more than any defense attorney ever could. I knew the truth. I knew the intentions, the hidden motives, the fractures no one else could see. And that knowledge was mine, unspoken, unyielding. The judge finally looked at me directly, and in his gaze, I saw acknowledgement, a quiet understanding, not sympathy, not judgment, recognition, that the years, the patience, the silence had all been purposeful. My son's certainty wavered. He had believed he could define reality for me, but he realized that reality is not always loud, not always forceful. Sometimes, it resides in quiet strength. The court session ended. Papers were signed, motions closed, and as the gavel fell for the final time, the room exhaled, some in relief, some in disbelief. I simply rose, slowly, deliberately. I walked past my son. He looked at me, searching for anger, for hurt, for confrontation. He found none. Only a quiet presence, older and steadier than he had ever known. No words passed between us. None were needed. The silence had said everything. Outside the courtroom, I paused. The winter sun fell across the steps. Cold, sharp, yet somehow comforting. I breathed in, slowly, deliberately, and in that breath, I felt the weight of all that had passed, all that had been witnessed, and all that remained unspoken. The story wasn't about winning. It wasn't about proving who was right or wrong. It was about understanding, about endurance, about holding space for truth even when the world expected noise. I walked away slowly, leaving behind whispers and assumptions. I carried with me only what mattered: clarity, dignity, and the quiet knowledge that silence, true silence, is never weakness. It is presence, it is understanding, it is power. And sometimes, the most profound victories are not spoken at all.